that Slick told Billy, and what I'm telling you, Jarek, we do not choose to believe in God, but it is the case that we choose to deny God.
That's impossible. That's logically, if one is the logical negation of the other, if I can't choose to accept God, then logically I'm going to deny God, right? Because I can't choose to accept Him.
We do not, once
John,
again, we do not
John,
choose to accept God. God chose us first, right?
Right.
And then
So the inverse would have to be true as well.
Now, and the inverse of it, God did
Give me
not
1
choose
second,
you
lady.
to deny God. It is the case that you freely deny God of your own volition, of your own choice. That's the common misconception.
If that were possible, then it would be you could choose to deny. Okay, so you can't choose to believe in God. God chooses you. But you can choose to reject God.
Absolutely correct. And that's the proper understanding.
So God doesn't choose to reject you, is what would follow from that.
No, we're talking about the individual's choice, right? Whether he has a choice or not.
Yeah.
It is not the case that he has no other choice but to deny God. That is not the case. He freely
What do you mean by choice,
to deny God.
Right, but then so God doesn't choose to reject you.
Yeah,
you make that choice.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what is going on.
Right, but there's a logical problem there. Because if God doesn't choose to reject you, then He can't choose He can't choose to accept you.
What He doesn't choose to accept you. That's how it's understood. There seems to be a thought that there's this active choosing to reject, unto damnation, things like that, right?
Well, that must be the case. If God only chooses the people for salvation, He alone is in charge of that choice. So He must also choose who He rejects.
I think, okay. Try to work with me now.
That doesn't follow.
There's a few
what John said doesn't follow.
May I finish, please? There's a few people in the water, let's say, right? And I choose to send you a life preserver. I choose you. And the other people that are not given this life vest, right, are not chosen to be given one, right? Now, the consequences of the situation is, first and foremost, that they did not even want. It's not like they're begging and pleading for a life. So, God, please save me. And God says, no, you know what? I reject your pleas and so forth. It is the case that these people did not even want the life preserver. And the consequences they suffer for their choices of not wanting a life preserver, right? God has only given life preservers to those who want it, first and foremost. Right, but it is true that God gives you that desire. So that
Could they have chosen not to be in the water, John, to begin with?
Could they have chosen not to be in the water? No. No more than you could not have chosen to be born.
Okay, so who chose that?
Who chose for you to be born? Or who chose for you not to be in the water? Preserver? Who chose you to be in the water? I would say that you chose to be in the water. Because
did you have a choice to not be in the water?
Yes. Actually,
you just said no. You said no
to be in the water.
You just said no 2 seconds.
By the choice, the consequences of which you chose, which is your.
John, I literally asked the same question like 30 seconds ago, and you said no. You just contradicted yourself.
What was the question asked about?
You choose to be in the water.
I said, can you choose not to be in the water?
They choose to remain in the water. They're born in the water.
There's two different questions. Can you choose not to be in the water? The answer is no. But the question is, did you choose to be in the water? And that answer would be yes. They're not contradictory.
It's the same question.
I never said that. But you answered the same question.
Two different questions posed is what I'm saying.
No, it was the same question. It was the same question. You answered it two different ways. The recording.
Okay, so once again, what was the question asked? And I'll answer it to you right now.
Well, you just answered it. You said that they cannot choose not to be in the water.
They cannot choose. Now, that was not how the question was posed.
That wasn't the question. I just made a statement. I asked you, can they choose to not be in the water?
So can you
said
the
no.
question again? Because is my understanding that
This is not complicated. Can you choose not to be in the water?
Correct.
No. The answer is no.
Great. Can you choose to be in the water?
The answer is yes.
Okay. What do you mean?
I don't understand you guys not understanding. You're saying that you're born in the water. You can't choose to not be born, but you choose to remain in the water if you don't ask for God's help.
That's not the question, though. The question is, John, you're saying that you cannot choose to not be in the water, correct?
That's correct. You cannot choose that.
Right. So there's no alternative possibility.
There's no alternative possibility for you not to be in the water.
Based on what?
Choice.
Okay, so this is my question. What do you mean by choice?
The question is,
how is the word choice? How is the word choice functioning in this discussion?
There seemed to be this implication, an accusation that I contradicted myself. They're not contradictory statements.
No, you did.
I tried to tell you that they were two different questions.
No, you might have misspoke or misheard the question. But
No,
my question is, what is the meaning of choice in this discussion?
No. I answered yes to the first question and no to the second question.
No, that's not what happened.
In that type of answer.
That's not what happened. But my question is, how is the word choice functioning? What does it mean?
What does the word choice mean? It represents an action of a will.
Okay, so it's just an action. There's no deliberation. There's no ability to do otherwise or anything of that sort.
It flows from one's
I didn't say that.
Look, it flows from one's nature. Look, this is actually not difficult at all. We do not choose God. Why? It's not in our nature to seek God. And I look at choice in the sense of a preference. Now, what John was talking about...
Then you don't choose to reject God.
Let me
If
finish.
you can't choose God because it's on your nature, then you don't choose to reject God.
You cannot
Sean.
choose
You can't do what's not in your nature. Right?
To reject God.
No, but that's not what he just said. He said we don't choose to accept God because it's not in our nature.
That's correct. So we do not choose God. God chooses us. But, however, we choose to reject God. There's not a contradiction in there. We cannot choose to accept God, but we can choose to reject God. There's no contradiction.
That's because it's in our nature.
You cannot choose something.
That's not the word choice.
Yerrick. Let me finish. Look, I'm a moderator, all right? We do make choices based on what our nature influences us to choose. That is a preference. It flows from our nature. It is not in our nature to choose God. It's not in our nature to seek God. Well, what is in our nature? To sin, to want nothing to do with God, to reject God. We choose things based on how it flows from our nature. This is not difficult. It's not.
It's not in the rocket science. They think there's a contradiction there. There's not.
No, because usually the word choice implies multiple options, but you're saying there aren't multiple.
Well, look at it this way. I've made this analogy.
Not difficult if you don't accept the contradiction.
I made this several times, Jay.
If you contradict yourself, then it is difficult. Otherwise, it's not difficult.
Hey, Sean, look, I brought you back up. I'm not going to do it again if I have to send you down. I'll let you speak. Just let me finish what I have to say. I've made this analogy before, Jay. I go into a buffet. There's all sorts of food items on the buffet, but I have one preference, and it's, chicken fried steak or pancakes or whatever the case is. That is my preference. That's what I want. That's what I desire the most. Although there is eggs and potatoes and green beans on the buffet too, I don't really care. My desire is for chicken fried steak. That's what I'm going to choose. That is my preference.
Yes.
So this is really the same thing. You're going to do that which you prefer. Well, why do we prefer things? Because it flows from our nature. What is our nature? To sin. This is not difficult.
Yeah, but Johnny, the question is, in the buffet example, when you have all these other options, what is analogous to that in the example that we're discussing from a theological aspect? Are they all different varieties of sin, or any of them the ability to not sin?
No, there is no ability to not sin. Why? Because we do not have that nature.
Exactly.
We are in.
Exactly. So you have a buffet of all options, which all have, which is the same result.
Jake, we're still going to choose based on how our nature influences us. What we prefer is based on our nature. And we have a nature for sin. We have a nature to prefer sin. Why? Because it's innate. That's who we are. That's our nature.
To try to understand it in like a libertarian free will type of sense.
I don't believe in libertarian
Well,
free
the
will.
choice is your only
Exactly what I'm saying, and the word choice I don't think is
We
appropriate.
don't choose God, right? It's not in our nature.
The only choices you've laid before is to sin or to sin.
And you don't choose not
Yeah,
God.
exactly. It's not a choice. You're just choosing the variety in which you reject God. That's not really a genuine choice in what we're discussing between sinning and not sinning.
We don't have the choice.
It doesn't even have to do with libertarianism, right? It's just that, like, what's the opposite of choosing? Not choosing, right? So if you can't choose not to sin, then you can't choose to sin.
Of course you can.
How?
How do you choose to not sin?
You can't.
Thank
That's
you.
what I was saying
Right.
about the water. But you can.
So how do you choose to sin?
You can choose to sin, absolutely.
You just said I can't choose to not sin. So
That's correct.
That means I don't
Well, there's no
choose sin.
choice.
There's no
just-
contradiction there.
No, it means you don't choose sin. It means you just do it, right? It means you don't choose it. Because you can't choose not to sin.
One is choosing to sin from options of not sin and sin.
Right, then one can
They
choose not
freely
to sin.
choose, according to their nature, to sin.
Right, if I can choose sin, that means I can choose not to sin.
No.
Because the negation, the
No.
opposite of sin,
Not dependent
is
upon
not
that.
sin. What choice means is you can do X or
No,
not
What
X.
choice means, as I said, is that there are available options.
Right.
Not
Yeah, the available options
And the options are not available.
category.
So it depends upon the available options, not whether.
Yeah, the available options, John, are all sin. They're all sin. They're not. It's the same type. They're just different tokens of the same.
And so it's not very difficult. We cannot choose
No, it's
God
not.
in our sinful nature, but we can choose to deny God. It's that simple.
It's very simple if you don't commit yourself to a contradiction, right? So you can choose to not sin. If you can choose
No,
to
we
sin.
cannot choose to not sin.
Right. That's the problem. If you can choose to sin, then you can choose to not sin. That's what choosing to sin means.
yeah. So how does any of this become the fault of the sinner?
Because they choose to sin.
Well, no, that's the only thing they can choose.
Well, it's based on their desires, which are determined by God.
No. Your desires are determined by yourself.
We pick our
Okay,
desire.
so-
Desires.
So who created those desires?
Not
Even
God.
if you fall from
God did not.
So God causally determined your desire.
No, I don't know how. Did you just hear what I said? God did not cause you to sin. God did not create you to sin. God did none of these.
So you're saying, are you saying, John,
Question for you. John, I have a
John, are you saying that Adam and Eve had a libertarian free will in the garden?
Yeah, that's a different question because
No, it's directly related because the question is, if they chose to do based on their nature, if they chose to do what they did based on their nature, and that was determined by God, then you've only backed the problem up one step and you haven't solved anything.
Wait a minute. This whole time, were you trying to fake me out to pretend you were Jake the Muslim Metaphysician? I have a suspicion you were not him.
Yes, me. What are you talking?
I think he is Jake. He sounds just like him.
You are Jake?
No, I'm not. What do you think? You can't tell my voice, John? What the hell, bro?
Okay, now I can tell. Okay. Maybe
How long have you known me? You've been listening to me talk for the past 20 minutes. You don't know my voice?
Well, I do now, yeah. I didn't recognize it at first. I wasn't really paying attention to who was talking and not. And
come on, John. You don't usually get worked over this usually. You should know.
Yeah, okay, no, I acknowledge it's you, okay. Anyway, how you doing? But anyway, with regard to choice, I guess you're saying that unless a person has a choice to do otherwise, it's not a choice.
Yeah, I'm saying that's semantically how the word choice functions for me. So if you disagree, that's fine, but I just disagree with your usage of the word.
Okay. Now, the way I understand the word is that choice represents available options. The ability for these options is not contingent upon how the word is used. Is that there's like option A, option B. That's a choice. If the person always chooses A, right, and he's still choosing A over the available option, which is B, even if within his nature he can never choose B in and of his own nature. But the option's always there. And people do choose it. Someone who is maybe regenerate will choose option B because they have a different nature, one that's given by born of the Spirit. And so those options are always available. It just so happens that one person cannot choose option B, but it's choosable.
The option's not there.
Yeah, but that's based on the current state of affairs after the fall. I'm asking, prior to the fall, Adam and Eve in the garden, did they have libertarian free will?
Yeah, that particular question about Adam and Eve having libertarian free will, I think I've taken the position in the past that they did have libertarian free will.
Okay, so then you don't believe that libertarian free will. So then you believe
that the option to not sin is there, but he will never choose it. Then it's not there. You're saying it's there and it's not there because he'll never choose it.
Well, first
no, but you're saying that Adam and Eve had a genuine choice, right?
It's a true dichotomy.
In terms of the way that we're using the word, that they could have chosen not to sin. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't word it that way because it was determined by God.
Okay, there you go. That's the whole point. It was determined by God. That's the whole point, dude.
Yeah.
So then they didn't have libertarian free will, and God is the first domino that's knocking down everything else, and that's the end of the story.
Well, I would say that God set up the conditions. He put the serpent in the Garden of Eden. But as far as like pushing the domino, I think there was agency there for Adam to actually push the domino. It's not that, Adam was some sort of puppet and he guided him on a string to push it. Or it's not the case that God with his own finger pushed it itself. I would say that the conditions were set up. The dominoes were set up by God.
Yeah, but Adam's essence, his nature. Because Johnny said before that you do things according to your own essence or nature, which I can grant for the sake of the argument. Mm-hmm. But in the case of Adam and Eve, if they did what was according to their nature and essence in the same way that you're implying now, then what's the difference? They, just as you say that I can't do anything differently because this is my nature to be a sinner, what's the difference with them?
I think in that particular case, there was a sense of not a sinful nature, and so that there was the ability to sin and not sin, right? They had that libertarian.
Okay, so now you're back to saying that they had libertarian free will, but before God determined them to do that, so then how did they have the libertarian free will?
Well, I'm saying that I think that as far as God's decree, right, it was the case, and I think the Westminster Confession says, please.
John, you know this is a debated issue in Reform circles?
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that.
I mean, you know the difference between infra and supra
lapsarianism? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a debated issue. So I think that's why you're a little bit caught up, because the way in which a Calvinist even answers, or somebody from the Reformed tradition answers this question, could vary depending upon who you ask. So there's no obvious answer given
There's no obvious answer. You're right. I mean, there's Calvinists that are intralapsarianists and supralapsarianists. So you're right. I mean, that's why when you ask that question, I mean, I personally have the view of libertarian free will. Now, when it comes to Jesus, he also had libertarian free will in a sense that he is like Adam, and they were both tempted, and it's such the case that Adam chose to disobey God, and Christ did not. And so that's kind of how I look at it in terms of...
So are you undecided, John, on that discussion? Would you be willing to be persuaded one way or another, given arguments?
Yeah, I would be, actually. I'm not firm in. I lean toward one, but I'm not firm in it.
Okay, because I think I remember that that discussion. I could be wrong, but I think even me and Jesse Palm way back disagreed on that, but I may be mistaken.
Adam would be the only human in history.
Doesn't Jesse hold to some sort of compatibilist view where they did?
So what's the stuff about choosing sin, John?
Yeah, I remember having that conversation.
Sean, we cannot hear you. You sound like you're in a...
I would have to ask Jesse on his position. I'm not clear on it myself. But I do lean toward them having libertarian free will.
Is there a reason why, or is it just an intuition?
Well, the reason I say that is because when it comes to sinful nature, clearly they were not created with sinful nature. And so if a person does not have sinful nature, they're not a slave to their sin. So their actions are not dictated by their slavery to the sin nature. And so that's how I reason that.
So then, I mean, but God obviously knew what they were going to do. You don't take an open theist perspective. So presumably God set up the scenario in such a way, whether it be the snake or whatever else, in such a way that, would you be comfortable with the terminology that determined, even though it wasn't his nature, something outside of his nature actually determined what they were going to choose?
Yeah, I think the way Jack Anstrike said it was, he's some kind of cause, some kind of
I don't think Jack knows much about this.
No, he does a little bit. Now, what it's called is a causal. I don't know, but basically, in other words, he's saying God's the first cause, of which I agree.
Secondary cause? Is that what you're referring to?
No, God is the primary cause, and that's it.
No, I'm talking about the other things that you're referring to.
It was distal rather than proximate cause, I think, that you're thinking of.